War is often remembered for the noise, the thunder of artillery, the shout of commands, the mechanical roar of tanks tearing through the earth. But the moments that truly define a man are found in the silence. It was late in the war, somewhere near the German border. The fighting had paused, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating quiet. Here, the lines between right and wrong blur into the gray of the winter mud. In this specific moment, amidst the wreckage of a skirmish, an American unit stood watching. They weren't looking at a map or a victory. They were watching one of their own, a man from the American West, make a choice that would defy every protocol of warfare. The winter of 1944 was unforgiving. It stripped a soldier of his pride long before the enemy ever took a shot. The cold was a physical weight, pressing down on shoulders already burdened by equipment and fear. Supplies were running low, and patience was running even lower. For these men, the war had become a test of endurance rather than courage. They were tired, they were hungry, and they were hardening their hearts just to survive the day. Compassion is a dangerous luxury when you are freezing in a foreign land. To care was to be weak, or so they told themselves. Among them was a man whose gait didn't match the rigid march of the infantry. Back home, beneath the vast skies of Wyoming, he was a ranch hand, a cowboy. He was older than the fresh-faced recruits, possessing a quiet stoicism carved by wind and isolation. He didn't speak much. He moved with the deliberate, conserving energy of someone used to working long days in the saddle. In the army, he followed orders, but his eyes told a different story. He observed everything with the calm scrutiny of a man used to watching the horizon for predators. He carried the spirit of the frontier into the trenches of Europe. Before the uniform, his life was defined by the care of living things. On the range, life is fragile and must be protected from the elements. A cowboy understands that a creature in distress isn't an enemy. It's a responsibility. He knew the difference between a predator that hunts and a beast that is cornered. But war demands you forget that distinction. War demands you see only the uniform, not the human inside it. Yet, as he walked the perimeter of the camp, the mud sucking at his boots, his mind wasn't on the geopolitics of the Axis and allies. It was on the basic, brutal reality of survival in the cold. His unit respected him, though they found him strange. He didn't join in the loud card games or the boasting about what they would do when they reached Berlin. He spent his time maintaining his gear, ensuring his socks were dry, and watching. Always watching. In the West, if you lose focus, you lose the herd. Here, if you lose focus, you lose your life. But his watchfulness wasn't born of paranoia. It was born of awareness. He saw the fatigue in his own men, but he also began to see something else across the barbed wire. The location was a temporary holding area, a muddy patch of farmland, repurposed to detain captured personnel. It was a place of misery. There were no buildings, just open sky and biting wind. The prisoners were huddled in masses, a sea of gray uniforms turning brown with muck. There was no glory here, just the smell of unwashed bodies, wet wool, and defeat. The air was thick with tension. The American guards were on high alert, expecting resistance. But the resistance had long since faded from these captives. These were not the propaganda monsters the GIs had seen in newsreels. As the German lines collapsed, the ranks were filled with support staff, auxiliaries, and terrified conscripts. Stripped of their purpose and their pride, they looked small. They were shivering uncontrollably, their boots worn through, their coats insufficient against the biting chill. Hunger had hollowed out their cheeks. It is easy to hate a faceless enemy. It is much harder to hate a shivering human being when you are standing just a few feet away. feeling the same cold in your own bones. The cowboy's eyes fixed on one prisoner in particular, a young woman. She couldn't have been more than 19. In another life, she might have been a school teacher or a nurse. Now, she was just another casualty of a war she didn't start, freezing in a muddy field. She sat apart from the men, her lips blue, her hands tucked deep into a torn coat. She was the image of total defeat. In that girl, the cowboy didn't see the enemy. He saw something fragile caught in a blizzard, waiting for the end. The cold does strange things to the body. It slows the mind, and eventually, it shuts down the will to stand. As the cowboy watched, the young woman tried to adjust her coat, but her legs betrayed her. She swayed. Her eyes rolled back. There was no sound, just the sudden, tragic surrender of her body to gravity. She collapsed face first into the freezing mud. The other prisoners gasped, but they were too weak, too terrified of the guards to move. She lay there, motionless. In the unspoken rules of this camp, if you fell, you stayed down. But before the mud could settle, the cowboy was moving. He didn't check with his commanding officer. He didn't unholster his weapon. He reacted with the primal instinct of a man who sees a life in immediate danger. He crossed the forbidden line, sprinting through the muck. He wasn't a soldier guarding an enemy anymore. He was a rancher, rushing to save a life from the storm. He reached her and slid into the mud beside her. Protocol demanded he treat her as a threat. Instead, he treated her as a victim. He turned her over, his rough hands checking for breath. She was freezing, her skin like ice. The camp went dead silent. American rifles were raised in confusion. Was he being attacked? No. He was doing something far more dangerous. He was showing care. Then, he did the unthinkable. He scooped her up from the filth. He didn't drag her. He lifted her. He sat there in the mud, cradling her head against his rough wool jacket, shielding her face from the biting wind with his own body. He held the enemy. The shock was absolute. There, in the middle of a brutal war, an American soldier was holding a German girl with the tenderness of a father holding a child. He looked up at his unit, his eyes daring anyone to tell him to stop. He grabbed his canteen and pressed it to her lips. "Warm coffee," he whispered. "It's all right, little lady. It's all right." The warmth of the liquid, and perhaps the warmth of human contact, pulled her back from the edge. Her eyes fluttered open. She didn't see a uniform. She didn't see a conqueror. She saw a savior. In that embrace, the politics of war dissolved, leaving only two human beings trying to keep the light from going out. The American unit watched, and slowly, the rifles lowered. The aggressive posturing evaporated. They were witnessing something that made their anger feel small. It is hard to maintain a facade of toughness when you see a man acting with such quiet dignity. The cowboy didn't care about the optics or the regulations. He waited until the color returned to her cheeks. It was a simple act of rescue, but it shattered the hate that had defined their lives for years. The atmosphere in the camp had changed. The air was still freezing, but the bitterness had dissipated, replaced by a confused reverence. By treating her with such profound respect, he had forced everyone else to regain their own humanity. One by one, other soldiers began to shift. A blanket was brought over. A medic was called. The dam had broken. The cowboy hadn't just saved a prisoner. He had reminded his entire platoon who they were supposed to be. That cowboy never told the story for glory. He likely went back to Wyoming, fixed his fences, and rode his range, never speaking of the war again. But for the men who saw it, and certainly for the young woman whose life was saved in the mud that day, it was the most important moment of the war. Wars are won by weapons. But peace, true peace, is won by gestures like these. We often ask, what makes a hero? Is it the number of enemies defeated? Or is it the ability to retain one's character when the world demands you become a savage? The cowboy showed that strength isn't just about force. It's about the capacity for mercy when no one expects it. He proved that even in the hellscape of World War II, the code of a decent human being could survive. The war eventually ended. The mud dried and the soldiers went home. But somewhere in Germany, a woman grew old, remembering the American who caught her when she fell. And somewhere in America, a cowboy rode the plains, knowing that when the ultimate test came, he didn't falter. In the end, we are not judged by how we fight, but by how we treat the defeated. Sometimes, the bravest thing a soldier can do is put down his weapon and offer a hand.